Okay.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Honorable to judges and honorable to people enjoying this video. So, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Tuya Rajatun Najah from Senior High School 1 Muara Batu in government team. With the motion is, this house will arrange students in the classroom based on their intelligence and academic performance rather than their age. Students are one element of teaching and learning activities wherein the teaching and the learning process students need to be grouped. Grouping are commonly known as grouping in the based on the view, and besides, the students have similarities. They also have difference, and the similarity that exists in students give birth to the idea of placing them in the same group, while the difference that exists gives birth to the thought of grouping them into different groups. In the difference between limits and examine more deeply, difference between individual and intra-individual difference will be found. The first relates to the difference between students from one to another in the class, and the second relates to the different abilities of each student in the various subject or file of study. This difference between student and intra-student requires different educational and service from them, because their individual difference of which are not considered less efficient. Grouping in the career of based on the similar rate and difference of students, so that deficits the classing teaching can be researched. The reason for grouping students is also based on the reality that students are continuously growing and developing. With this growing and development, students are required to be able to develop their potential optimally. So, students are grouped. Therefore, it is important to have student grouping. The following will be discussed further regarding student grouping. Occurred based on the ERI Law 20 of 2003 regarding SIS-DIGNAS or National Education System, students are a member of society who try to develop their own potential through a learning process, available at written pace, level, and the type of education. After regressing into this right educational institution, students need to be grouped or classified. In the general, grouping is also known as the grouping. This grouping of students is not intended to different students based on their expertise and level of intelligence. This level of intelligence, but the purpose of this group is not absent in the teaching and learning process from the success of students. In the other words, the grouping of students intends to help students develop their ability and optimally as possible, so that grouping should not be interpreted differently except from the development process of their students. The grouping of students is based on the view that in addition to have similar rate, students also have difference, and that similar that is exists in students give birth to the thought of placing in the same group, while the difference that exists in the student give birth to thought of grouping them in the different group. If the difference between students and the other are more deeply, it will find difference between individual and intra-individuals. The first is more accentuated by how different students are from the another on the class. Second, more accentuated in the different abilities of each student in the various subjects or files of study. The difference between students and the between students require different educational service to them. Because their individual differences are the considered less efficient, grouping is carried out based on the similar rate and difference of students, so that deficiencies and classical teaching can be reduced. In the other words, grouping is the core principle in the teaching classical system and individual system. The reason for grouping students is also based on the reality that students can constantly growing and developing. The growth and development of learning is different from the one another. So, the rapid development of the student does not interfere with the slow learning and vice versa. Grouping student is carried out. The grouping of students is based on the view that is addition to have similar rate. Students also have different. That similar rate can exist in the student give birth to thoughts of placing in the same group, while the difference that exists in student give birth to thoughts of grouping things into different groups. If the different group between the another are examined more deeply, will be found different between individual and individual interaction. The first is more accentuated by the how different students are from the one another to the class. Second, more accentuated the different abilities of each student in the various subject or field of study. The grouping of students is also based on the reality and the students are constantly growing and developing. The growth and development of learning is different from the one another, so that the rapid development of students does not interfere with the slow learning and vice versa. Growing student is carried out. Students who have high academic score in the school need to be grouped into one class. This paradigm is still inherent in society, and teaching usually use that paradigm to classify students who have high academic achievement in the class. This study aims to provide an overview of the attitude of teachers, students, and parents regarding the implementation of student grouping based on academic achievement. The ratios were the conduct on the student, teacher, and parents at the public elementary school in the Semarang city. The population in this study will 160 students in the grade 5 and 4, and 160 parents and 6 teachers in the grade 4 and 5. Data were collected using questionnaire and interview. The results show that in class A, teacher or high school agrees with the grouping of students, and the class B teacher or the medium class, and the class C teacher or low class disagree with the student grouping based on the achievement. Class A, B, and C students agree with the student grouping based on the achievement. Parents from class A agree while parents from the class B and C expresses disagreement with the grouping of students based on the academic achievement. That's all. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi